welcome to Q&A with S&A. This is our podcast for Shane and Andrea, and we talk too much, so you'll get used to that along the way. And today we have a very special guest with us, Peter Gandolfo. And Peter, he doesn't need any introduction, so I won't give him one. He is an amazing man, and we're very, very grateful that he's going to sit with us and talk today. So thank you for coming.
So, Peter, let's wind the clock back a little bit. I think it would have been around 1994.
That'll do.
Yes.
That'll do. And you were working in a relatively new building.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was.
In Hawthorn.
Correct.
And you were the young bright spark.
Yes.
Working with the chap who had the role of managing partner.
Correct. At an accounting firm. Yes.
At an accounting firm. And the way he tells the story, he taught you everything you knew.
Yes.
And the way you tell it, Shane, is he actually did really well out of the deal.
Yes, I think he did.
And so you were, apart from the fact that there were referrals between the two practices, our law firm, which was here in Camberwell, and yours just across in Hawthorn, you were actually our personal accountants.
Yes, that's correct.
So, yes. So that stayed because when I talk about it wasn't that much later that I left the legal practice.
Mm-hmm.
For good. I left legal practice
Yes.
for good. I decided I was going to not be a lawyer.
So elaborate on that a bit more. So you were a lawyer at the time when we first met, and you were a partner in a law firm when we met.
True.
And yeah, what has changed since then, or what has been the timeline since then?
Since then, well, at the
or
time,
you can even go back further than that.
So I started in practice in Camberwell a while back.
Yes.
And I was in the firm for 20 years, same firm, which I think these days people wouldn't understand.
No.
It's quite rare. The thing was, in those days, you started somewhere and that was what you did, that was your vocation, and you'd be there forever.
Yeah.
There was no thinking that you'd have a career path. As it transpired, I think it was it was a wonderful environment for learning, that practice. And so it turned out that I thought I might keep learning, and that was fine. So I gave 12 months' notice and am still very much engaged with that practice. But the idea was go and do something else. So the something else turned out to be, I'd given the notice in the beginning of January. By mid-November, I had no idea what to do. I was still working. In fact, I worked up till about 10 o'clock on the 31st of December that night when I left. I was still going.
Yeah.
And the decision at the end was pretty obvious because I saw something called new technology. And I thought, this is fantastic stuff. You could actually see an image on a screen, on a computer screen, which I'd never seen before, and you could click into it and work stuff out. So you could look at a map and you could work out what was there when you clicked on that part of the map. And that became, because I was a tourism lawyer at the time, I was very interested in how that might apply to tourism. So within about 6 weeks, we decided to set up a business in an industry called multimedia, which didn't really exist.
No.
And this was 94, I think, or 95, and there was no internet other than the US military. So we had touchscreens and we had CD-ROM technology, but brilliant designers. And we had a few of them working for us, and we had to go to the clients and say, how about this? And they'd say, wow. And then they'd go to the accountant or the CFO and they'd look for the line in the budget where you could spend the money on this, and all they could spend the money on was computers. They didn't have budget for anything like design. So it took us a while to get it off the ground, but fortunately we managed to get enough sensational clients and have some great success stories to kick the whole thing off, and we became one of the leading businesses in Victoria/Australia at the time, and went through a period where we went for tenders for 12 months without losing one. We won every tender across Australia and we had a studio of 30 designers, and was wonderful. And ultimately, we sold that company because in the meantime, the .com thing came along. So there's all the dough being poured into the industry, and we're a little self-funded company. And so we're trying to fight off people who wanted to recruit our staff, who wanted to pinch our clients. And they managed one staff member, no clients. But it was just really hard because we had to keep competing. So, and people were knocking on our door. They wanted a piece of it. And in the end, a public company came along and we thought that'd be a good fit. So we sold. So while I wasn't practicing law at the time, there was still a lot of legal stuff going on, as you could imagine.
Yeah. And then after that, you sold that business. Then what was the next
then
phase for Peter?
Well, what had happened was, pardon me, when I left legal practice, of course, people who sit behind desks think they know stuff. And, of course, you don't. You realise as soon as you get into the commercial world, you've got no idea, and all of a sudden people treat you differently and you've got to actually cut it. So there were a lot of lessons in that. And the other thing was we were actually working on a lot of new business development for clients. So we were launching products and launching businesses for them and doing product development, you name it. The result of that was we actually had some great IP, and I had a fair bit of it myself. So I decided I'd get on with a career in commercialising businesses, which I then did. And so until 10 years after I left legal practice, I was working in a business which was called Gandolfo Commercialist, which I'm not sure that's a name in the English language, the word commercialist, but nevertheless, that was good. And that took me into environmental areas, into security, a lot of IT, obviously, and also international trade and various other clients. So I was working with a number of clients very closely. And so the next step in all of that was there was an invitation from somebody that I was working with in that field, who happened to also have a firm in Collins Street, a law firm, and said, well, look, maybe you can give me some help. And so I went back, but it was like climbing a mountain. Even though, as I said, I'd had a lot of legal experience effectively on the other side of the desk as a client, I was understanding what it was like to be a client, which is terribly different. That was useful. So when I decided to go back into practice, I had to learn all this stuff that I hadn't learned. But at the same time, I at least had this knowledge of what a client might be thinking and how does it work from their point of view. And that was who I really thought I was.
So that experience of being on the other side, being the client, was really a positive and a beneficial thing for you in terms of going back into legal practice.
Yeah, very much so. It was, and I'd always, even in my earlier practice, I'd always had this view that the client was the hero. And I guess when you realise that I grew up above a pharmacy, we lived above a pharmacy, and both my grandfathers were manufacturers, one of them a bootmaker and the other one a clothing manufacturer, using their hands, literally manufacturers. That was all public-based. So the retail pharmacy meant you could see in operation my old man, who was very good at it. And so that was the sort of thinking I had. So I went when I started in law, I couldn't understand why things were so different and how they could possibly work. And there were fixed fee structures. There were a lot of prohibitions on people doing things. You couldn't do conveyancing unless you were a lawyer, for example. Lawyers weren't allowed to advertise. So one of the things that sparked my interest was when I realised I could get involved with the Law Institute, and I did that from an early age as a young lawyer, and then for the next 20 years or so. And I was on the marketing committee, I chaired that, and professional standards committee and various other things, where we're actually changing the way lawyers could present, and we changed the way they could charge, and that was something that I was heavily involved in took 7 years to be able to authorise lawyers to be able to charge on a contingency basis, controlled contingency basis. And we had opposition from all over the country, but we got through, and every one of those things was really important in being able to give people what we called access to justice. And I had been on the Legal Aid Commission in Victoria. I ended up chairing it. And all of these things, whether it was legal aid or whether it was contingency fees or being able to market your services so people knew what to choose. We started here in Camberwell, we kicked off an advertising campaign for local solicitors, which I led. I started that up, and then subsequently got a suburban-wide group together where we had 31 solicitors kicking in $6,000 back in the mid-80s each practice. So we had a budget of a couple of $100,000.
Yeah.
So we advertised on TV during the Test cricket.
Wow.
Ah, okay.
And we had a permanent office in the city. We were exchanging precedents and know-how and building a whole lot of knowledge. So all of that to me was about the client, giving the client a proper understanding of what their rights and opportunities were. And obviously the other side of that is to make sure you fearlessly represent them, to give them a shot.
Yeah.
And so all that direction I feel comfortable with and fabulously supportive of. So therefore, come back to your question about me going back into legal practice. Things had changed in that 10-year break. They'd improved. One of the hard things was, of course, a lot of the legislation had stopped being state-based and become federal. So all of those new federal laws were things I wasn't familiar with. So I had to get up to speed really quickly. Superannuation was becoming important when I went back to practice in the early 2000s. So that new learning, I happened to be lucky enough because some clients, one of them you'd acted for, Shane, in the 90s,
Yes.
had asked me to do it. And in fact, on that score, that particular client, who's been a client of mine since the 70s, remains one today. So there's been this ongoing thing about make sure you stay true to your clients' wishes, understand them properly, and work with them and the more you do, the more you can help, and it never becomes an issue. Price, of course, is something that why would you ever talk about that when it's all about value and helping people?
Correct.
Yeah.
And they appreciate what you can do, or they go somewhere else, or they ask you what they could do and where they could go.
Yeah.
So that's sort of me getting back into legal practice. Back now almost 20 years ago.
So let's wind forward a bit. Let's go to 2021. So just a couple of years ago.
Right.
You were... I'll actually probably let you tell the story, but how did we reconnect and where did that conversation go?
Well, you remember I mentioned this chap
Yes.
who
shall
was
name nameless?
We're not
at the
mentioning
moment,
it.
yes.
But I'm getting a bit sweaty and we'll have to towel off soon. So he was the chap that was the managing partner.
Yes.
He actually was a client of mine all the way through when I went back to legal practice. And I had worked with him when I was not practicing law as well. And he told me that young Shane McKenna, and I'll still use that word honestly.
I'm happy to keep using it for as long as you like, so that's fine.
Younger than some.
Yes.
Who was now in Camberwell with his very good accounting practice, which I was familiar with. When I'd been to see Shane when he was just kicking off in Chapel Street.
Yes.
And again in Kew.
Yes.
And then Peter said, oh, pardon me.
I'm sure he won't mind being mentioned. He will get mentioned, I'm sure, throughout.
Why don't you have a chat to Shane? Now, I'd already given notice, 6 months' notice where I was, and my intention was to not practice law. I was actually really getting interested in some environmental activities, and thought, well, that'd be pretty pretty good if I can do that, because there'd been this shocking absence of any interest in the environment for decades. But it was now starting to come to the boil, and I thought, well, if we've actually crossed the chasm, I could really do something useful in that area, and that could be very interesting.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Well, so
other things became.
So, Andrea, why don't you tell me what you've
No,
been
I'm saying
told about
unfortunately for the environment
Yeah,
that didn't happen, and fortunately you ended up with us.
Yeah.
Which I think is, it's been incredible, and it's let us fulfill a dream that we had of being able to bring all of the services under one roof, because as you know, and now that we've been in business together for some time, there's no way we could have done it without you knocking on the door that day. So I mean, we may have done it in some format, but I don't think it would have been even remotely close to as successful as what it is, because and you would say this as well, and you've been one of the biggest advocates of our team's commitment to values, is that what we really value as a big team, and all the directors and all of the people who are involved in the business, is community. And what you bring to the business is that incredible sense of community, because you have been involved in the whole process. So you've known Shane from the minute that he walked through the doors of that building in Hawthorn East, and you're still involved. So there's story and family behind all of that as well.
Yeah, so just to fill in on that, so yes, we had a conversation in 2021, late 2021, about the desire for Aintree Group to set up Aintree Group Legal, so our own legal practice. I don't like using the word practice.
We're not practicing.
We're not practicing.
We're pretty expert at it. So.
And so that conversation went exceptionally well. And in February/March 22, I think it was, you basically set foot in the door and started up Aintree Group Legal. And I suppose the rest is history. 18 months. 18 months later, we now started with one person. We now have 8, and it's been an exceptionally successful endeavour. And as I said, as you've said, Peter has been a big part of that. So, so how have you found that move from? I suppose you had to change what you were wanting to do. So partly I feel guilty that we've pushed into a direction. But how have you found that whole journey?
Well, it's been sensational. Pardon me. The first thing is when Andrea mentions culture, that's the beauty of we won't call it practice, we'll call it reality, right?
Yes.
So I was hearing the word reality show before, and this is real reality. So there's a great spirit, there's wonderful communication, and the really terrific thing about it is the clients are on board with it, and they understand it. And really is like family, and I can compare it to other places. Because when you have been in, I'll call it business for so long, I've experienced public company culture and biggish private sector and organisational structures and smaller businesses, professional or otherwise. And this is the most sensational attempt or effort, better, at actually focusing on what's important and delivering that. So the result of that is you still have day to day all the challenges that you're going to have. You never miss those.
No.
But there's a great sense of belonging and support, which is really invaluable in terms of being able to deliver what you're supposed to be delivering. So so I suppose that's the short answer. It's also been good the way the legal firm
not practice, firm. Run with that. Let's run with that.
Has melded because we've had some senior practitioners come in kind of at a lateral level.
Yes.
Which is always challenging for businesses. Obviously, you want to grow your own, and we want to do that. That's going to be important longer term.
Yeah.
But to get the experience and transplant that in, I think it's been great the way the governance has worked. Governance is as it should be. Interestingly, this isn't the first multidisciplinary business I've been in. I've been in another one for quite a long time prior to this, and I don't know if it's because accounting and law are really kindred, or whether it's something else, but there it's easy to see how you can service a client or protect a client or engage a client in a much more productive and constructive way. And that then I know will mean that your vision, Andrea and Shane, for a full service offering is capable of being delivered. Now, I've got to tell you, when I started out back in, it might have been 2008, there are a number of lawyers, I know quite a lot of lawyers, a lot of them very experienced, who said to me, this can't work.
That was with the previous multidisciplinary
that
business.
Type of, because there'll be conflicts of interest. And I said, that's right, in the sense that you know what the challenges are going to be and we've got to deal with them.
Yeah.
And that was the job. But the model that you've now developed, or we've developed together, is actually very supportive of managing all of those challenges. But on the other hand, because you shouldn't ever construct anything on the basis of, the small risk, should be based on making sure you get the full promise. We handle the risk, but the promise is able to be delivered.
Yeah.
And I think that'll happen more and more because obviously 18 months in or so, maybe a bit longer, people are getting used to the concept, but boy, do they reckon it's appealing. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I think the clients are really super thrilled that they can get advice instantly. I know we've had accounting clients come in for meetings in the conference room, and Shane will literally walk down the stairs and say, can someone come up and involve themselves in this meeting, because it gives instant. And that's, the clients just think that that's incredible, that those sorts of synergies can happen, because normally what we're having to do is say, here's a referral to somebody, you've got to wait and make a phone call and all of that, but the team at Aintree Group Legal are actually just really instantly accessible, which is, I think, from a client perspective and from our service perspective as a team, of the way we want to try and be the first point of contact for our clients, it's just really, really important, and I think it's been great. So Peter, if you
just
don't mind me...
Oh,
yes, sure.
On that, if I may, before I came here, I rang a client, and because I'm doing some work for that client before a tribunal this afternoon, and the client said, well, I'm in the building with naming the accountant, the director, working with the client. And so up I went, and we had a chat to get ready for this thing.
Yeah.
But it was then quite apparent that client sees the whole service as one thing. Yeah. Obviously, we respect our professional boundaries, but it's really workable.
Yeah, I think so.
Pardon me.
No. I want to go back to the point that you made about growing up living on the top of a retail pharmacy. I want you to tell me how the value of growing up in a family where, because retail is really tough, and I don't think people understand how retail pharmacy works. I do, because I spent a bit of time working for pharmacists, so I understand. But retail pharmacy is one of those things where you're not only a retailer, but you're providing a professional service as well, which is quite fraught because people come to you with their health issues. And you grew up in that environment where your family was caring for the community in that way. And I also grew up on top of a shop, not a retail pharmacy, but a shop. And I think that it gives you a different perspective about how business should run. How has the fact that your family were business people as well as professional services providers informed the way you work as a person?
Well, my old man used to open the shop 5 days a week plus Saturday mornings.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was permitted. You weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
There were a lot of restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then he actually set up a night prescription service, which was a cooperative group of chemists.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the photos of them the other day. He was being filmed by the Channel 9 crew back in the early 60s, if I'm right, where they came on location to this night prescription service that they had a roster.
Yeah.
So, and then they were also able to open on Sundays. They'd have a roster.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd be working nights, mornings, and most weekends. So he worked really hard, and he was very young. I mean, when I was born, he was 22, and he owned he had an offer to buy a pharmacy at that time, but it took him a year or two to do it, till he found the right one. And he was terribly innovative, so he got himself somehow involved with the Pharmacy Guild, and he was responsible for a whole lot of developments in promoting healthcare through pharmacies to the public. And they were packaged up, and he also was involved with Amcal. And he got his cousin on the board of Amcal. So he opened up, I don't know how many pharmacies he opened, but maybe a dozen or more in partnership, because you had restrictions on ownership. And all the time there was always better. So he went into the big shopping centres. He was one of the first tenants in the big shopping centres, and he knew the landlords, George Herskew and Maury Alter, and they'd put him on he was the head of the shopping centre committee, and so he was, and of course all the political parties wanted him to represent them and stand for pre-selection in their electorates. He was very good at what he did, and he had a great customer approach. And we lived in the community as well, so we moved from the shop to a house nearby in Beaumaris, and so we just knew all the people, and they flocked to his personality was great. But he was his brother. He had 4 cousins, male cousins. 2 of them became chemists. He had another cousin who became a chemist, and then he had nephews. So there were about a dozen of them. There were cousins. They all followed what he'd done. So it was always clear to me that he was an innovator in every respect. He used to talk about staff training when nobody had ever heard of it. And merchandising and buying was important, all of this stuff. So it was about thinking, not just doing what was done. But he'd been a maverick, my dad. He didn't marry an Italian woman. She happened to have a Swiss-Italian grandmother, but she wasn't Italian, and that was considered to be a serious thing to do. So he was very courageous and brave, and so I saw what he was able to achieve, and so I didn't have any difficulty in knowing that in the same sort of environment, in, say, the legal industry, you could do the same stuff. And I always had his support and encouragement to do it. So over those decades when I was involved heavily in legal activities in the beginning, there were so many innovations I was involved in. I was able to get people to come along with me. But it was just, I think, because he'd already said, this is what, or shown me what you do.
So why was law your calling?
Well, I've already answered that, because if you had had about a dozen rellies in pharmacy, plus an auntie who was in pharmacy wholesale, and a cousin who was a rep for someone else, the last thing you want to do, I mean, what would I have achieved if I had gone into pharmacy?
I was thinking more so you thought there was lots of opportunity for legal work out of all the things that they were doing.
Fair point. Well, there was a bit of that, but I wasn't instructed when they got really heavy. Well, I did do a lot of work for the family in different ways, and but it was literally because, again, that independent streak. I wanted to do something different. So that's part A of the answer. Part B is I did okay at school, but to get into uni, you had to have certain prerequisites. And when I finished school, I had none at all, not a thing. No maths, no languages, nothing. And so all I could get into was law and commerce.
Okay.
So,
So the bar was pretty low at that
very
point,
low.
is what you're
well,
saying.
well, in one sense, although commerce was the hardest faculty to get into,
Yeah.
and that was the faculty I got into. And med, I think, was fair way behind that. Law was a long way behind. Anyone could get into law in those days. It's all quite different now.
Yeah.
But I got my scholarships and I got them all the way through.
Yeah.
Because I think there's been some stories, which we won't go through today, about you being a little bit of a troublemaker, I believe, when you were younger. So, but we won't go. We'll leave that for another podcast.
This is the
maybe.
independent.
for another
This is the
day.
independent street.
Yes. No,
But
well,
anyway, I've learnt my lesson. I hope.
Well, that's the key thing, isn't it? You learn from things and challenges and mistakes that you might make. I'm not saying you have made any mistakes. I think you were just a mischievous young boy, weren't you?
Well, I did get asked. My mother got holed up one day when I was we're in prep. Hang on, prep and grade 1 was the same classroom.
Yeah.
And at the end of that year, I was in prep. We all went up to grade 2. They just put everyone up to grade 2. And then that was the year the mothers committee met and said that
That Gandolfo boy
I should
is a
go
naughty
somewhere
boy.
else. So my mother had to plead. My mother had to plead with another school to let me in, and they gave me an entrance exam which I failed, and because I was totally illiterate, I hadn't learned a thing, and then she got me in on probation, and told me I was in on probation.
Mm-hmm.
So I then decided to knuckle down and get on with it.
And look now where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Clearly the entrance exam meant nothing. So
yeah, let's park law for a minute. So life outside of work and Aintree
Yeah.
Group and law, what are your interests?
Well, the good thing is there is life outside, and that's part of the deal. The office hours aren't killing; they're really sensible, and you get constitutionally kind of conditioned to working long hours and there was always this competition to stay last in the office, which now doesn't happen, and that's terrific. There's music. There's always music. There has to be music. Not that I play, but my family's musical, and we've now been fortunate enough to find a place down the beach that we go to whenever we can, which is most weekends, down on the South Gippsland coast. But
yes.
I keep telling people it's many, many, many hours away.
It's too far away.
yeah, you definitely don't
should
want to go
never
down
go
there.
there.
Don't think about a holiday house down. It's way too far.
Yeah.
And then I did mention we had designers working with us in the multimedia business, and design is something that appeals, and it's not just confined to the studio, how the studio looks, or a building, although obviously that's important, but it's about how you do stuff. So it's about structuring. If you're a professional, you design it properly, and then like you design a multidisciplinary business. You put in the principles, you think about it, you do the strategic stuff, and it pays off. And then you go through all the other steps that you need to. But being able to work with designers very closely was so liberating. And the work we did was just mind-blowing. And the really weird thing is that the work we did then is quite often better than what gets produced today.
Okay.
A lot of it's quite just rubbish.
Yeah.
And not intuitive, done to a pattern.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of talent around, and it's great when you have an opportunity to work with people that have got those, those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I don't think I necessarily got anywhere near your question then.
Oh,
Shane.
you did. Back to music though. Any particular genre or?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there was a dance floor at an event I went to the other night, which if it had a bit of jazz or some classical, I don't know, you can really dance other than to a waltz or something. But I'm not really across the more modern
That's okay.
types of music. I grew up when there was wonderful... we always had the radio on when I was a kid, and there was no TV.
Yeah.
So all those musicians coming right out of the swing era, and of course, Frank and
Yeah.
Yes.
various others. But now we listen to ABC Jazz, yes, which is
There's
on
a good plug for ABC Jazz.
digital television. Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just there's no news, nothing. You don't get anybody telling you about stuff, which is important these days. And the music, the selection is just sensational. And then it's ABC FM, the classical music. But we do have a fantastic. We're sitting here in this wonderful booth. Fantastic collection of CDs, if anybody remembers them.
Yeah, I still remember those.
I think listeners will probably know about CDs. I think maybe if we're talking in 10 years' time, nobody will understand what a CD is. But I think, going back to where you were when you started the design business, when you, as you said, there was no internet, there was nothing. And we were talking to another episode with a friend of ours who is a big tech person. So he is actually responsible for the wiring and the cabling and all of the things that go into bringing us to podcasting and YouTube videos and all of the things that were not part of life when you set up your design business. And hasn't life changed so much since then? The connection that you can have with people. You're listening to, digital, classical music when we used to listen to it on a little radio that was, had an aerial, and you don't need those things anymore because it all runs through the internet and life has changed. So
You're sounding old.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I am sounding old.
Yeah.
I think that's okay. Sounding old is all right. Now, I know, Peter, you've completely missed the fact that there's a sport that you love. You haven't talked about it at all yet. And I think Shane was trying to tease a bit out of you about that. So what is your favourite sport?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, look, I play tennis. I'll play tennis tonight.
Yeah.
But I do yoga regularly, and that I don't know if that's a sport, but it's pretty useful.
Yeah.
This morning I was at the gym as usual when they opened at 6.
Yeah.
And so they're things I do.
Yeah.
And obviously I like taking in fresh air and wandering around, walking around. I watch some sports occasionally, but not a lot these days. I would prefer to, I like watching a game of footy, but I won't listen to the commentary.
Yeah.
I'll have music on in the background.
Yeah.
And occasionally I won't bother watching the game. But I do have a team I support, which is an AFL team, and I've been very fortunate because I happened to pick it by myself in the late 50s.
Wow.
And it did well, and I think I've seen more flags than anybody I know.
Yes. So Hawthorn is a team. Yes.
And we lived in Hawthorn in the 80s, so we'd wander up to the ground on show day because that was the public holiday before the grand final.
Yeah.
And for 7 years running, they were training.
Yep.
I don't think many of us can say that our AFL team has been as successful as 7 years running
in the grand final.
And for the grand final.
Yeah, and they played 8 out of 9 in that sequence.
Yeah.
And they got tied one year and Collingwood won.
Which is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love cricket. I love watching cricket. Obviously we all play beach cricket, and that's a lot of fun too.
Yeah. So when you go down to the beach, Peter, what do you do down there? What brings you joy when you have a weekend at the beach?
Plenty of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, for a start, it's not just the beach; it's the beach and the bush. And we know now, because we're there a lot, probably more than Melbourne. There's very close relationships. And so when we're in Melbourne on a weekend, it's like being on a holiday, which is really strange. So we've got some deep and enduring friendships that we've developed in the years that we've been down there. And they're not just in the little place where we've got our property, but in the towns around.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful little towns in South Gippsland. There's so much character, personality, and a lot of art and culture, and there's a lot of music going on. Of course, the yoga thing itself is wonderful because it's on the beach most of the
Lovely.
time, and we're looking out across the water to the land and the ocean in the background, and then you get a chance to actually take a break. So there's a beautiful rail trail through that area, so we can get onto that and wander around.
Yep.
So there's plenty, and obviously family come down and friends and
What about food? Tell me what you eat when you go down there. Tell me on the podcast, because I know what you eat when you go down there. And I'm really keen for you to tell our podcast listeners how you spend your weekend of food, because we will feature heavily food on this podcast because we are big food people. What do you take down there to eat?
well, there are places to eat.
Of course there are, yeah.
And we do like to give the local economy a bit of help.
Yeah.
We take down very healthy food. There's plenty of good wine down there too, of course, in that area.
Yeah, I don't think you think of it as a winery sort of area, do
Yeah.
you?
That's
Gippsland, so
right.
that's interesting.
But there's one winemaker down there, Philip Jones, who was in the top 10 winemakers in Australia for
Wow.
4 decades running.
Okay. Incredible.
No one else was in it.
Yeah.
He was the only one. And he is the father of Pinot Noir down there. Sensational. So it's the challenge down there is for them, it's not as developed as it was historically in the West.
Yep.
So the Western District, it was opened up. You couldn't get through the mountains or all the marshes going into Gippsland.
Yeah.
So it's actually still a hidden gem.
Yeah.
And
It's a long way
And
away.
hence why we're not
Don't
naming
go down
we're not
there.
naming where it is either.
no, we're not. We're not. But there's wonderful food down there, of course, because if you do eat beef, it's grass fed and all the there's wonderful berries and superb
You've chosen
produce.
a good part of the world to spend your downtime. So it's great. I think it's,
And world famous cheeses too.
Yes, yeah.
True.
Again, we won't mention what they are because otherwise we'll be giving away the location. Peter's secret hideout on the weekend. It's all very, very spy-like. So, Peter, thank you so much for coming and spending today with us. I know you have got a hearing or a tribunal or something this afternoon, so you're probably rearing to get off to that and help out the client that needs your assistance this afternoon. But we really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with us on our Q&A with S&A this afternoon. And no doubt you'll hear from Peter on one of our other podcasts. We do have a second podcast going, which is called Plant, Grow, Reap, where all of our Aintree Group team will be involved and our legal team, and no doubt Peter will share some of his fantastic stories. There are a lot of them, and Peter is always good for a chat. So thank you for today, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Q&A with S&A. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Andrea and Shane.
Thank you.